Hello and welcome to Swallowing Paper. This is, for all intents and purposes, the first review on the channel, but contrary to that, this is actually my second one, because the first review is for a completely unreleased book, so I'm taking a liberty of the fact that both Melancholy 1 and 2 have been released for some time to release this review in full. It was only about 2 or so months ago when I first received this copy sent in by the good people at the Dalkey Archive, and having heard a lot about Fosse in recent time, that Dalkey was going to release these 2 novels in a single volume, I was keen to take it on, and while I knew what I was expecting, I didn't specifically know what it'd be like actually reading it. And while both books form a whole, telling essentially the same story from different angles, I want to review them one by one, then as a single piece, because there are key differences between both works which ironically aren't as cohesive as they should be. For Fosse's own writing evolves between books, and at the end of Melancholy 1, I was made skeptic, and I refused to pretend I liked everything. Also, this isn't even in the script, but I ended up talking about them as a whole right after I said that, so yeah. As you may know, both Melancholy 1 and 2 are novels about Lars Hedvig, a Norwegian painter of lost potential only made famous posthumously. And while reading, I wondered just what parts were true and what parts were of Jon Fosse's invention, especially because there were contentious moments throughout Book 1 that I feel may even tarnish the reputation of the painter Jon Fosse was writing about. And after doing a fair bit of research, nothing of the like really turned up, so I could only say that Fosse didn't intend for these details to hurt the painter's legacy, but only to remind the reader of the period he lived in. First of all, the realization struck me about 50 pages in when I realized that Jon Fosse's writing is mischaracterized as stream of consciousness, which Fosse himself has never claimed, and rightfully so, as he describes it as his slow prose, which to me may perhaps be the best way of explaining it, because the writing reads more as cyclical narration than an actual thought process. As when people are thinking, the mind doesn't narrate everything it perceives in conscious thoughts. If one sees a piece of paper, they don't think, I'm going to the paper and I'm going to pick the piece of paper up and I'm now picking it up and I'm now holding it in my hand. Unless maybe, just maybe, there's some kind of significance posed by the paper, as thoughts are practically imperceptible until poached by words. Thus, if one sees something they know, they don't have to force words to the thought. And this is where the descriptor stream of consciousness fails, because in that case, if it were a stream of consciousness, then Lars unknowingly decides that everything is significant enough to warrant a thought with words. And in that case, Fosse is unable to discern thought from narration. And how upsetting it'd be for every thought to be thought as though you're reporting them to someone. A car just drove by, but while Fosse's prose is often described as incantatory, sometimes hypnotic, in my experience reading both Melancholy 1 and 2, I didn't get that, aside from the obvious repetition. In my experience reading both Melancholy 1 and 2, I didn't get that, aside from the obvious repetition. Rather, I felt as though the book itself was a work devised to engage the reader with the passing of time, and Fosse's subject matter paired with this time consciousness brings about a reading experience you only miss if you're afraid to confront the passing of time. But because Fosse's prose is so simple, events are stretched across series of pages, which makes the story tremendously easy to spoil, even fragile, if you're looking at it from a narrative perspective. And while I wasn't going to talk about the events from the book in the first place, this quality of the text further turns me away from doing so. And building on the idea of Fosse's writing being hypnotic, I won't say that I slipped into a trance while reading, but I found it, at times, difficult to get into because of the repetition itself. It wasn't irritating, it was actually reassuring, but having both autism and ADHD, it felt as though his prose enabled my thoughts to wander and ultimately inhibit my reading of the book, because sometimes the simplicity makes it difficult not to slip into your head, and as a result of this simplicity, it can even be difficult to take a lot of what he's saying seriously because it's so unconvincing in the way it's written, lending it an unintentional humor. And here's a passage I snipped from the text, not because it was funny, but because I liked it.
He, Lars from Hedvig, stands with his arms around Helene Winkelmann, and he is so calm, filled by something he doesn't know what. Lars Hedvig is where Helene Winkelmann is. He is no longer himself. He is where she is. He is in something, he doesn't know what. He is where she is. He holds her in his arms, and then she puts her arms around him, and he presses his face down into her hair, into her shoulder. He's standing in something he's never stood in before. He doesn't know what that something is, and he, the landscape painter, Lars Hertevig, has no idea what it is he's standing in. But then it hits him, and then he knows it. Then he knows he's standing in something his pictures are aiming at. Something that's in his pictures when he paints at his best. That's what he's standing in now. He knows it. Because he's already been close to what he's standing in now. But he's never been in it before, like he is now. He's never been where the painter Lars Hertevig is, standing and breathing through Helene Winkelmann's hair. And he stays standing there, in her light, in something that fills him.
I actually had another passage I wanted to share, but there's a lot of incestuous stuff in it, and it was a really strong tone change there, and I just decided, never mind. And as I said, I was made skeptic with the Nobel buzz still near as it was in 2023, but that's because I thought that he could have done better. As when I finished it, I didn't feel any way about it. I wasn't vexed, I wasn't sad, I wasn't made happy. Rather, what I felt was along the lines of subtle confusion. That aside, it didn't put me off. That was all. Which is where Melancholy 2 comes in. As with the ending of Melancholy 1, the narration changes from first to third person, if you don't count Hertevig referring to himself in the third person as third person narration, and where Melancholy 2 differs is in how it's primarily told in the third person, featuring less repetition when it comes to the language and compensating by ignoring punctuation with greater fervor and making repetitive the action of the story. It would drift seamlessly between third and first person with much more fluidity, as though Fosse realized his powers, what he should have done long ago, and is thus acting on them in the perfect coda to end his rendition of Hertevig's story, if not to save it. As opposed to the blurb, the story of Melancholy 2 doesn't occur on the same day of Hertevig's death, but on the day of his siblings growing weaker, as narrated by Hertevig's sister. And in every place where I believed Melancholy 1 was lacking, it was in Melancholy 2 where my previous reading of Melancholy 1 made sense, with the exclusion of Act 3 of Book 1. It's not that you can't read Melancholy 2 without the concept of Book 1, because, believe me, you could read number 2 without having ever read a word from Book 1, but it felt as though it was the perfect companion piece, and to have never published both Part 1 and 2 as a single volume, that was a great error which, up to now, has finally been fixed. About 40 pages in, I'd continued my reading of Melancholy 2 with the aid of William Basinski's Disintegration Loops, an ambient project I like listening to, because I felt that it captured the emotional intensity of Melancholy 2 up to a T, specifically a scene concerning tearing the shingles off a rooftop during a heavy rain, with Oline, Hertevig's sister, keeping watch, though in present day she was drifting in and out of memory as much as the latter propped up on the rooftop in her mind 60 or so years ago. In this book, Fosse explores something a lot more universal than the artistic temperament, and that is growing old. The embarrassment, rather the stigma, of your body working against you, shutting down, causing you to shit yourself, with a heavy emphasis on peeing and pooping. So not only is Melancholy 2 a psychological work, but it concerns itself greatly with the physical, which makes entire sense considering both the physical and psychological are inseparable, and many psychological works tend to neglect the body. While a lot of the story was predictable, the dialogue unnatural, even deadpan in its writing, like I said, it's unconvincing, the book finds a way to hold you, and something about the repetition works through you in a manner Book 1 couldn't capture, and I thought the ending scene was appropriate, even necessary, and makes up for the detachment you feel in the final act of Book 1, as though Fosse decided to bring you closer, inward. And the translator, Damien Searles, mentions initially finding the story to be depressing, but I understood it as being a thing which frees itself. Overall, when looking at these books as a single work, I find that Book 2 exudes the potential in Book 1 while carving a path of its own. In spite of the discrepancies between Lars's depiction in Book 1 as opposed to Book 2, despite the coldness of the third act in Book 1, the work as a whole holds its weight, even with the things that make it less perfect. And I feel that I've been geared up to take on Jon Fosse's septology in the near future, but I suppose that it's better to work to his smaller standalone works instead, something like Alyssa the Fire, A Shining, or Morning and Evening. And that about wraps it up. Thank you for checking out the video. If the book, because it's a single volume, but if the book interested you, feel free to buy a copy of this July from the Dalkey Archive. My copy was unfinished, so the whole flipbook thing wasn't implemented in the paperback I have, which just means that anyone who saw me reading saw me holding a book upside down. Anyhow, have a good day. Go read, go or listen or write or do nothing. Everything counts.